Dinner and a Book is supported by the Rex and Alice A. Martin Foundation of Elkhart, celebrating the spirit of Alice Martin and her love of good food and good friends.
Set on the remote Korean island of Jeju, the island of sea women follows the lives of two friends, Young-suk and Mija, two women divers of diverse backgrounds who share their love of the ocean. They belong to an all-female diving collective where gender roles are anything but typical. Let's meet my guest, Evie Kirkwood, to find out more about their lives. Welcome.
Thank you, Gail. This was a delightful book and a surprise to me.
Oh, well, it was a surprise to me too, and I loved it. I really thought it's probably one of the 20 best books I've read this year.
Wonderful.
I just wanted you to know that because normally we do things about biology and,
we do.
and lab work.
I rarely read novels, and for some reason this one intrigued me, but it is a historical novel.
It is.
And so there's lots of history embedded in this book.
So before we get started, we continue on, let's talk about what we're going to make. Tell us what you're going to be doing.
I'm doing two different things today. I'm actually making a spicy, everything's spicy today, actually. Spicy sweet potato bake with Asian sweet potatoes. So this is a sweet potato that most of us think about that we can get here, but Asian sweet potatoes are very different looking, deep red, white, even the center of this white one, look at that beautiful burgundy color.
It is lovely.
Yeah.
I've seen those presented, but now tell us where you found that.
One of the great things about books is it introduces us into new worlds,
Yes.
right? We learned a lot about these women divers, the Henyos,
Right.
but I learned a lot about the Oriental markets right here in South Bend and Elkhart.
So what you're saying is don't be put off by, oh, I won't be able to try this because I don't know about this food and where to find it.
Right.
He knows where everything is.
I tried all the markets in South Bend. Some have a Japanese slant, a Chinese slant. There's one in Mishawaka that has kind of a Korean slant, which was perfect for this book. Even went over onto Beardsley Street, and that's where I found the Asian sweet potatoes. So great fun, great exploration in those stores.
And we'll be investigating some of the special sauces that are mentioned in these recipes. Well, I am going to chop these cucumbers. Well, I've actually pretty much chopped them on the diagonal. And then I'm going to do some matchsticks of fennel, a fennel bulb, and we will salt that and let it sort of, what do you say, season, let the juices run out, the liquid, and we will, for 30 minutes, so we will just get that started because time flies. I've taken the bulb of the fennel bulb and I have sliced it in half, and then I'm making little matchsticks here. If you can, maybe you'll see that. And I tried this the first time and I made them too thick. And I'll get that out of the way here.
You know,
but
Gail,
these are matchsticks,
one
yes.
of the things that I thought was interesting about Young-suk and Mija, who were two women who, as you mentioned earlier, very diverse backgrounds, but commonalities, they both liked to dive, they both were divers eventually. But also there's a lot of talk in the book about the gardens that they have and growing sweet potatoes and growing vegetables. So I think it's interesting that the dishes that you and I have chosen today they're pretty much all vegetable based, right?
Well, you know, as I'm reading this book, the New York Times comes out with kimchi recipe for different vegetables, but it's not the fermented kimchi because that takes a long time to prepare. It is something you can do and have it for lunch with rice or noodles, and I'm going to just put some salt on these vegetables for now, and we're going to put them in a colander to drain, and there goes a matchstick. And so that's going to be the base. It's like a side dish that you serve with the main course, or it can be the main course for lunch, served on rice. And I'm going to make rice to go with it. So part two here, I have to get the garlic. I have a garlic bulb I've chopped up, and with it I'm going to put some vinegar, white wine vinegar, about 1.5 tablespoons here, and that's going to be ready to put on the cucumber and the fennel bulb matchsticks after 30 minutes. But so I wanted to get that started so we weren't waiting forever for these things to, what do you call what's the verb?
I always say weep. They have to weep the extra moisture out, right?
And this writer in the New York Times uses kimchi, which is the name of this kind of presentation of vegetables. He uses it as a verb. You can kimchi cucumbers, you can kimchi radishes,
That's
you
great.
can kimchi cherry tomatoes. It means go through the process of making it with all of these excellent herbs and sauces that we are using. So it's not, remember, kimchi really we think of as cabbage that has fermented, and it is strong. This is more seasoned and tasty, and you use it right away. You don't wait a month or so.
That's great.
That's the
Sounds
reason
perfect.
why we're making the food today. And we're talking about, like you said, the 2 young girls who really are, they're like bosom buddies. They really
Very
are. They
close.
go through the ups and downs of life. And actually, Young Suk comes from a family of divers, and Mija was an orphan. And her father was a collaborator with the Japanese.
Right.
So she is not highly regarded by some people.
Yeah.
They're
Everyone's
suspicious.
very cautious.
They're
right.
cautious.
Around Mija.
And actually, she's living with an aunt and uncle. They're not always very nice to her.
They're not.
And so we have these 2 girls, and they really become lifelong friends. They dive together, and they spend any extra time that they're not gathering sweet potatoes, cooking when they get home, taking care of baby, diving, and then coming home taking care of babies. And in one scene, they take their newborn babies with them, and the babies are left on a boat. The mothers dive,
I know. That's
come
later
back
in the book,
up, and then
they're
they
married.
nurse their babies, have a little lunch, and go back into the water because this is their livelihood.
I think it's interesting too to learn about the amount of training that goes into
Yes.
these women collectives. So really, it's a group of women who are bonded by their love of the ocean, their great skill, free diving. They don't use any apparatus. It isn't until much later when they actually start to use masks and wetsuits.
Yes,
but they actually
60s.
wear something almost similar to what you're
Yes,
wearing.
it's white, all white.
Cotton.
Yes.
And they dyed it in green persimmons, and somehow that gave some kind of protective characteristic to the
Yes.
fabric.
Well,
it's
talking
fascinating.
about fabric, you were in Korea, and
Yes.
you bought an outfit that
did,
you
I
could
did.
wear and to do anything you wanted to do.
This actually is an outfit from Korea, kind of a working person's outfit, so I thought that it fit.
You're working
with,
today.
With today, I'm working away, working on the food. So yeah, exactly.
Well, that was surprising and perfect, just perfect. And I really liked this story and this. It's a sweeping story. It's intergenerational.
It
These
is.
women train their daughters. They want sons, but they at least have to have 2 daughters because the women earn the money to send the boys to school, not the girls,
Yeah.
until much
Right,
later.
Much later in the book.
And these women work so hard. I mean, they're gathering water. They're digging for sweet potatoes. They come home and feed the kids. I mean, it is.
Very hard. Very
And
hard work.
I think they get away to meet their friends in this collective just to escape family life.
And their husbands,
And their
who,
husbands.
who don't seem to be very energetic at
No,
all.
they
At least
sit
in this
home,
story, they're not.
and now they don't seem to be. And when the women come home, they like to go and sit under a tree and play cards,
Right.
and have some drinks
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. Anyway, it has a lot going on in this book.
Hey,
And-
Gail, I'm going to interrupt you here
Go right ahead.
so I can let folks know what's happening
Yes.
here. You had talked about there's a spicy garlic paste, chili garlic paste that is used in a lot of Korean and much Asian food dishes. And so I've mixed that with a number of things, a little bit of sesame oil, a little bit of rice vinegar, lots more garlic. And I'm tossing it with the beautiful sweet potatoes and some onions, and then I'm going to spread it on a baking sheet.
Oh,
So
it looks good.
Yeah,
And
it
I
smells good,
borrowed
too.
some of this sauce too, which I couldn't find for my my, what is it, instant kimchi that
Instant
we're going
kimchi,
to
I
have.
love that.
Yes, instant kimchi.
I love that.
So again, 30 minutes here. I have some garlic and vinegar here, and then we will add, when this is already seeped, we're going to add it back here to this a mixture, and then we'll add some sesame oil. And you found that too at
the Asian market on
Beardsley
yes,
in Elkhart.
yes, right.
And
So-
then I'll add some of this sauce and some fish sauce, and you say, oh my gosh. But the flavors are,
layers of flavors.
I think if you've grown up with these flavors, I think Indiana cooking could seem a little bit
Bland.
And bland is the word. Yes. So we talked about the conflict that happens during their life. This starts in probably the middle, what would you say, 1930s?
Yes, it does.
But the Japanese are an enemy. They've always been an enemy. Then you have the World War II, and then the Korean War. You have the North coming down to invade the South, and the Americans come in and get involved, and horrendous things take place. There are some scenes in the book well, it's war.
Yeah.
It's war. And this is cooking. And we have to take a little break.
Got to pop these in the oven to let them bake.
Got to bake them right now, yes. So we're going to be right back, but we want to take a look at some pictures of the women divers, and they're still diving today. We'll be right back. And today our book is The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. My guest is Evie Kirkwood. And I am cooking rice for our kimchi, and I'm going to add my matchstick fennel bulbs and cucumbers to a sauce of garlic and white vinegar. And then we'll add some sesame oil, some of this hot sauce that you
Yeah.
something like
right,
that.
right.
And then we'll add some sugar, and there we go. This will be and I actually should have mixed that with the sauce there that was in there, but we'll just throw this in. Well, we won't throw it.
And one of the things now that I'm working on are Korean rice cakes. So this is actually what a Korean rice cake looks like. It's actually made from rice flour, and then it's pressed into a cylinder, which I think is really interesting. Very different from what
Yes.
I have grown up to know as, like an American rice cake, dried puffed rice. So Korean rice cakes, you can get them in the local markets, sometimes frozen.
Will they be puffed too, just like?
No, it's literally rice flour that's pressed into this cylinder shape. And I'm going to be stir frying them with a little bit of either cabbage in the traditional recipes, or this is a collard green, which is in the cabbage.
Gorgeous.
It came
I
from
thought
my
it was
garden.
a plastic
I know.
appointment for the table.
Came from my garden.
Perfect.
So it's in the cabbage family, so that's what I'm going to use. It's really pretty green color.
One drop of fish sauce in here, and then we've got everything.
And also, the collective of women, this sort of communal arrangement that these women have, Haenyeo is the Korean name for these women who are divers. I was fascinated by their hierarchy. They have baby divers who are just learning, which they're not really babies, but they're 12, 13 years old, all the way up to the grandmother divers.
Women in their 80s and 90s are diving.
Holding their
Yes.
breath for 2 minutes.
Yes.
So that they can dive down for sea urchins, which really their tools are just a knife, a net, a basket.
That's it.
And then they have a float called a tuwak that kind of floats above them in the water to indicate their location.
Yes.
They
And it's
travel out on a
fascinating.
boat and then they jump off.
They jump off and they're up and down. And as we mentioned before, they bring their babies, but the babies stay on the boat, obviously. You're doing a chiffonade
I did a little
here.
chiffonade with that, with the
Yes.
cabbage leaves. Just gives it a little
Beautiful.
green color. Yeah, I'm discarding the chewy stems. And I'm going to be stir frying some onion in here as well. and it'll get this same kind of spicy garlic sauce that I've mixed with a little water, a little bit of sugar, and a little more garlic, believe it or not. There's
We've
a lot
got
of
a lot
garlic.
of garlic, and I have my salad mixed up. I'm going to add, just for color, some slices of radish and spring onion, but you can also kimchi these and make it its own set of kimchi for the day. There's so many ways to do this, but the authentic way is not this way. The fermented is the authentic, and you should go to maybe Sunny's on Spring Street.
Right.
And there is a Korean house on McKinley.
There is, yeah.
So you can try the foods there and compare. This is not going to be as fermented as you would find in the restaurant. We're going to let that sit for a while. The rice is cooking. We'll serve this on the rice, and that could be lunch, or it could be a side if you're going to have any other main dish. Now,
I think another thing I was fascinated in the book about was the change in the culture for these women.
oh yes,
Very simple life, worked as a team, a unit, and it was all women driven. And they were really some of the first eco-feminists. They were conscious about where they dove and not over harvesting.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the book, rather than diving in their cotton clothes, which they were criticized for,
Because they were see-through.
they had wetsuits, they had masks, and then men were in charge of the Asian fisheries, which didn't sit quite
sit well
right
later on.
but they
Right.
adapted. The women, absolutely, the Henyos have been very adapted to culture change, and fairly rapid culture change.
Well, and the whole point too is that these women were not educated because they were the breadwinners. I mean, I'm trying to get my head around that.
Right.
But today they are sending their daughters to school. These women provided the money by selling these items that they took from the ocean, and it was for the education of their sons. But Han Suk's husband said, no, we are going to also educate our daughters. And the mother originally said in the beginning, but why? They're going to earn money just by, deep sea diving here. And he was more progressive.
He was more progressive. And as we go through the book, we learn about Young Suk and her happy marriage and Mija's not happy marriage. As young children, those two young girls did rubbings of places that they went.
Oh, yeah, I like that, yes.
That was very charming. And they shared them with each other. There was a falling out between those two women.
Yes, during the war.
During the war.
Actually, Mija's husband was abusive. In fact, I would say he was murderous. Young Suk said, please take my children if we have trouble. And she said, I'll make sure your son will be taken care of. But then she turned her back on Young Suk's child.
And her child.
And we don't find out for 30 years why she didn't take the son.
Mm-hmm.
And we find out later when there is a tape recording of Mija saying, I knew if I brought your son into my house, my husband would beat him.
Right.
And
Very sad.
But in the place of that, he was killed by probably North Koreans coming down and invading the South Koreans. So there is so much in this book. I mean, it is fascinating. This hierarchy of women, but the closeness and how they took care of each other and how they loved to get together.
Love to get together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now you've just added.
I'm adding sardines. Obviously, these women, it's fun in the book. The women don't eat a lot of the things that they harvest because the things that they harvest, they sell, and that's how they make money. But they do eat things like dried anchovies or simple fish. You don't read a lot in the book about them eating the abalone or the octopus. Because those were saved to sell at the market or to the fisheries.
So that's.
But I added a little sardines. It'll give it some flavor.
Ooh, it will. I can
and
smell
you can smell
that.
it.
Mm-hmm. When there's off season or they don't have opportunity, the fish are not there, they go off and do sort of, what do they call it, a special, we're going to go to another country or another city and we're going to work there, earn money, and they aren't married yet, but they're going to earn money to buy things for their husbands.
And isn't it interesting how the marriages were all arranged?
Arranged.
very strategic by grandmothers often.
And actually, these two women weren't so sure that their grandmothers had done the right thing.
Exactly.
But Young Suk's marriage is very successful. She's a very nice husband, very loving, very. He wants his daughters to be educated, and that was the main thing that impressed me. And as time goes on, as we talked about the things going on in the island, the women are never reconciled. Mija moves to the United States.
She does.
But her great-granddaughter has a tape of Mija telling the story of what really happened and why she didn't take her son. And in this big massacre, Young Suk lost her sister-in-law, her son, and her husband. So that was tumultuous times, and we read it and we feel it in this book. At least I did.
And I think it's very poignant. You talked about the tape recording at the very end of the book. Mija's great-granddaughter comes back to Jeju Island from the United States, seeks out Young Suk, who's now much older and eventually
probably in her 80s.
But it is Clara, this great-granddaughter, that helps Young Suk understand Mija's true story through the tape recordings. And poignantly, Mija had been sending letters from the United States to Young Suk, but Young Suk was so mad for so many years, she never opened those letters.
Well, I can understand the misunderstanding, but also the hurt.
The hurt. And when she opened the letters, so many of them contained some of those wonderful rubbings that the two of them had done as children, which I thought was really, really charming.
Came full circle in all these activities.
Right.
This smells so good.
Yeah,
and I have
it looks colorful. We just got to have just a little bit of sardine in there.
Isn't that interesting?
And it softens those chewy rice cakes. So I'm going to plate them here in just a second.
We're going to do some plating. We're going to invite you to our Korean feast. And I hope you enjoy the book. I would just encourage you to read it. We need something different in our life. We need to experience another culture and what certain people go through just to make sure their children are educated. And so I highly recommend the book. Okay, well, the next thing we want to do is show a picture of the map of this area off of the coast of Korea, the southwestern coast of Korea. And so join us for our Korean supper or lunch. I think it's more like a supper, isn't it?
Sure.
So we'll be right back. The Island of Sea Woman, I highly recommend it. And Evie and I have been cooking up a storm, chopping, cooking.
Spicy dishes.
Yes, tell us about what you made
We have the Korean sweet potatoes that we baked, and then we have the chewy rice cakes, spicy rice cakes, garnished with some sesame seeds. And before you talk about yours, let's not forget, we
let's
kind
look
of
at
have,
the table.
There's a theme about gardening in here as well, because all the Henyos were gardeners as well. So again, the sweet potatoes and the garlic chili peppers up here.
Beautiful ones you chose.
Yes.
They're so.
Tangerines.
Tangerines, that's a good dessert, a good fruit.
And they grow them there. The women grew them. It was a snack for them oftentimes.
And I recommend them highly. We use them as snacks.
Dessert.
And
I use them as dessert.
Yes, dessert. They're wonderful.
And last night when I was just doing some cleaning, I had forgotten that I got this handmade paper from Korea when I was in Korea in 2005 that's hand stamped. So that's what this is all displayed on, which is nice. Yeah.
Just perfect.
And what you made, that wonderful kimchi.
And the wall hanging.
You made this wall hanging, which is beautiful. And kimchi.
But the kimchi, which is not fermented, but it's got a kick to it now. When I made it at home, I didn't have the red sauce. Now it's steams up the room when you eat it, but it's really good. We're going to serve it on rice, and this is a perfect meal. It really is.
And light. Light.
It is light, yes. And a lot of things are kimchied, that's my verb. You can have it, on rice, buckwheat noodles and have it at noon. Oh, and we are just moving along here. Tell me, how would you recommend this book to someone?
If you're a novel lover, then this book is really something that you'll be interested in, especially if you like historical-based novels. And for me, I was fascinated about the story of the women and their transitions and the changes, and the fact that they really are eco-feminists. They were way ahead of their time.
They really were. The whole society on this island was way ahead because the women were in charge. I loved the book. Thank you for suggesting it. Today, some of these women are working in hotels, and they
hospitality.
Hospitality.
They've become a tourist attraction.
And yes, they have. So times have changed, but the food remains good. The women were smart, and all of that. So thank you for coming and providing a wonderful meal, and thank you for joining us today. I love the book, and I hope you will come back next week. Remember, good food, good friends, good books make for a quality life. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Evie.
Thank you.
This WNIT local production has been made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Dinner and a Book is supported by the Rex and Alice A. Martin Foundation of Elkhart, celebrating the spirit of Alice Martin and her love of good food and good friends.